If you've got a camera drone like this DJI Mavic 3 or maybe a Mini 3 or Mini 4 Pro, you'll know that there's a really simple way to create aerial panoramas. You launch the drone, fly to a good spot, tap the Pano button on the controller and off it goes. It spins around and tilts the camera up and down and takes a load of photos automatically. And then in the drone, it stitches them all together into a kind of giant panoramic JPEG that you can whack on Facebook or wherever takes your fancy. And then everyone oohs and ahs as they spin around the view, especially if it's somewhere that they know and love. And there's no doubt a 360 panorama is seriously engaging, arguably even more than a video, because you're in control and you choose where to look and how far to zoom in. Now that's all well and good, and because the drone does all the hard work for you, it's a very easy way to create something incredibly impressive with a single button press. But what if you want more? Maybe you want to offer high quality, full 360 panoramas to clients as a proper service. The built-in drone ones don't really make full use of the 4K images that your drone can capture, and they're not truly 360 either, because you don't get the full sky or the ground, and you're a little bit restricted on how and where you display them. And what if you want to put it on your own or maybe the client's website? I mean, the files are humongous. So in this video, I'll show you what I reckon is the best workflow to properly capture, stitch and share a full 4, 5 or even 6K aerial 360 panorama, and how to publish it on a website at full resolution. Hello and welcome to the Whirly Bloke channel. Now, I'm not going to take you through every tiny detail of capturing the photos with your drone. That's honestly the easiest part of this whole workflow, and it will vary depending on the drone and the controller that you're using. But I'll give you my tips, a few gotchas, and show you my preferred way of doing the whole process. And I'll walk you through each step of the process in detail, so this will be a bit of a long one. But use the chapters to skip around if you like, but I'd recommend watching to the end first and then jump back to the bits that you actually need. Essentially, all you're doing is taking a series of overlapping photos as the drone yaws around 360 degrees while the camera tilts up and down between each rotation. It's a bit like taking photos of the inside of a sphere. You end up with a complete set of typically 40 high-res images that form the inside of a globe. So before we start, there's some important setup advice regardless of the drone that you're using. You need to use manual camera settings. Even though the capture only takes a few minutes, clouds can come and go, and if you leave the camera to decide exposure or white balance, you'll end up with an uneven pano that's hard to stitch cleanly, and you'll end up with some nasty seams. Avoid ND filters unless absolutely necessary. They're great for video, but not for stills. ND filters slow the shutter and can cause motion blur, which ruins sharp stitching. Choose a calm day with some nice fluffy clouds. Clean blue skies or full overcast conditions are much harder for the stitching software to work with because there's no detail or contrast. If that's all you've got though, don't panic. I'll show you how to fix or fake the sky a little bit later on. And shoot at the highest resolution that your drone offers. RAW's best, but JPEG can work just as well. Pick an interesting location, a big empty field with one tree and a sheep. It's not going to hold much interest. And I find hovering at around 150 feet, which is 60 meters, gives a nice balance between scene detail, privacy, safety, and here in the UK, staying within CA regulations. And if you're flying something like a Mini 3 or Mini 4 Pro, which is under 250 grams, you can of course go lower, but do stay safe and considerate. Watch out for moving objects. Fast cars, boats, waves, even people they can end up duplicated or smeared in the Pano, which means much more editing later on. If you're using a DJI drone, Pano photos will always be saved in the Pano folder on the SD card. You'll find the stitched JPEG and individual images there as well. You only need the original photos for this workflow, so make sure that your drone is set up to keep them. The number of photos and overlap in DJI's Pano mode is fixed, and it's usually around 26 to 34 shots in 3 or 4 rows with very limited upward tilt. So while it's quick, I tend not to use it for high definition work because I just want more control. My preferred method? Well, it's Litchi. It lets you customize the number of rows and columns and even how many Nadir shots that takes. That's straight down for the uninitiated. For a full spherical Pano, I use 8 columns, 6 rows and 2 Nadir shots. And I put a 1-second delay between each just to be on the safe side. Of course, Litchi doesn't support all DJI drones, but anything up to the Phantom 4 Pro or the Mavic 2 Pro works fine, even the old Mini 2. And my best ever Panos were with an Inspire 2, mainly thanks to its 360-degree gimbal. But what about DroneLink? Well, it gives you more control than DJI's native apps, and it works with newer DJI drones that Litchi doesn't support. And I've had great results with it, but it's not quite as finely tuned for Panos. And if none of that works for you, just shoot manually. As long as you allow enough overlap, 30 to 50% maybe, the stitching software like PTGui or Hugin will do a brilliant job. And this is my fallback method, and it's surprisingly effective. Now, one last thing, most consumer camera drones, including all the DJI models, can't look straight up. Even the new Mavic 4 with its clever spinning gimbal can't quite manage that. You'll always end up with a hole in the sky or some props in view. But don't worry, there's an easy way to patch that up in post that I'll show you a little bit later. So yes, while I said I wouldn't go into all the details of capturing the photos, it turns out there's actually quite a bit to think about. But once you've done it once and you've got the process nailed, it applies to any drone that you fly. Once you've captured your set of overlapping photos, it's time to stitch them together into a seamless 360 image. And there are a few stitching tools out there. Some are free and some are paid. But for me, the best results consistently come from using PTGui. Now, I'd love to say there are great free or open source alternatives. And to be fair, Hugin and Microsoft ICE are probably the best of them. But they start to fall apart when things get a bit tricky. Mixed exposures, moving objects, full 360 equirectangular stitching, or even if you need to patch the sky or the Nadir. Now, PTGui, it just works. It handles odd angles, blends exposures beautifully, and nails control point alignment, even with 50 overlapping images, shifting clouds, some rogue prop that's in shot, and maybe a bus that's moved halfway through. But most importantly, it's fast, even on a fairly average computer. They've really got the stitching engine dialed in. And if you're serious about creating high-res interactive 360s, whether it's for clients or for your own portfolio, PTGui is well worth the investment. Let me walk you through my typical workflow using PTGui with a little help from Lightroom, Photoshop or Affinity, and explain why it consistently beats the free options, even though they aren't half bad. If you've shot in RAW and the images need a bit of a tweak, I'll bring them into Lightroom for a few quick corrections, but honestly, unless they're way off, I usually don't bother. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it's really easy to mess things up. Even small mismatches can cause stitching seams, and I'd rather avoid that. I do my best to get the white balance and exposure right in the camera settings on the drone. And that way I can skip this step entirely and save a whole load of time and a whole load of disk space. But if you do need to make adjustments, here's my top tips. You need to sync the white balance across all your images and tweak exposure and contrast to keep things consistent, especially if the lighting changed mid-shoot. And if you're applying lens corrections, do it very carefully. Just use vignetting, not distortion. And I recommend exporting as 16-bit TIFFs for the best quality, or JPEGs if you're short on time. And avoid sharpening, gradients and fancy tone curves. They can throw off PTGui's control point detection. This isn't a Lightroom tutorial, so I'll leave that to the dozens of other excellent guides that are on YouTube. Now, stitching with PTGui is pretty straightforward, especially if you're letting it do its own thing. But if you run into problems or you fancy digging into all the knobs and switches, their tutorial videos and documentation are genuinely excellent. If you've never used PTGui before, don't be put off by the slightly retro looking interface. It's not the prettiest, but everything's easy to find and it just works. You can manually edit control points, mask out props or people, blend exposures, and even do HDR merges all inside this same tool. This is PTGui, and we need to get our images in here, which is very straightforward. This is a set of photographs that I took earlier this year at Clare and King's College and Fellows Garden, and they're a very nice set of photos which you'll see in a minute. I've got 49 of those. Now I took these with my Mavic 3, and because that doesn't work with Litchi or any of the other software, I did the Pano by hand. Very straightforward, very quick, and I aimed for about 30 to 50% overlap. PTGui does such a good job, you don't need to be 100% accurate on this. So let's align the images, and this will be our first approximation at the panorama. It's thrown us into the panorama editor, and this is all looking very nice. But before we do anything, I just want to adjust the quality of these images. We go over here and select tone mapping and select apply tone mapping. This automatically does a sort of HDR type process on the whole thing. Now you can play with that manually if you want. To be honest, I find that the auto settings are very good. And then importantly, we need to do the same thing with the exposure and just select exposure fusion. Again, you can play with these knobs and switches to your heart's content, but just choosing the automatic settings has given us a really nice punchy looking image. Now, as I said, these images were done manually, and the exposure and white balance and everything was set manually as well. This is looking pretty good, but there's a couple of things in here we need to fix. Most obvious one is this great big hole in the sky that we've got up here. And there's also some nasty cranes over there on the horizon, which they just don't look great. And down here is me and my spotter and our high vis. I think I'll get rid of those as well. There's lots of ways you can do it, but PTGui does make your life easy by just combining everything into one workflow. If we go up to Tools and select Detail Viewer, let's move that out of the way. And if we go and view all the way up and zoom out a little bit, we can see that is our hole in the sky, which is contributing to all this area over here. And we need to fix that. There's a number of ways of doing it. PTGui has its own patch editor. They call it patching, but it's very similar to clone stamping or healing brush within Photoshop. The best settings I found are leave it at TIFF. If you're going to use Photoshop for doing this, TIFF works the best. In fact, I think it works the best for all of these processes. And I'll let PTGui choose where it's going to save things, which is in the project folder. PTGui has its own patch editor, which we could use, and that works great for fixing up Nadir holes. So if you've got problems down here or you've got something a little bit nasty going on, PTGui's patch editor is very good for that. I found it's not quite so good for fixing holes in the sky. There's a better way. So I'm going to choose an application. As you can see, it's picked up all the photo editing software I've got installed on my Mac. Now, if you're anti-Photoshop, and that's fine, then you don't have to use it. Affinity Photo 2 is probably my next choice. It's got some very nice clone stamping and healing brush options. But I'm going to choose Photoshop for this. So all we need to do is say create patch. You need to save the project, and it's going to put it in the same directory as my original files. And that's then loading things into Photoshop. And whilst that's happening, if I just go over to the source images here in PTGui, you will notice there's another image appeared. We had 49 images before, there's now 50. And it's created an image, which is this TIFF image, that is going to be edited in Photoshop and then put back to where it was. So there we go, it's loaded it into Photoshop. Now you can use the healing brush if you like, or you can use clone stamp to fix this, but I find it's not as successful as actually using the generative fill. So if we just draw around the hole in the sky like that, make that selection, fantastic, and then hit generative fill. Don't type in anything, just hit generate. And Photoshop is doing its stuff. Now, like I said, you could do this manually, but it's a little bit painful. But let's see what the generative fill gives us. And I think that's actually really rather good. Let's look at the alternatives. You know what, I quite like that, the last one. I'm going to stick with that one. Let's get this back into PTGui. So all we need to do is to save that. Just use the defaults. Where are we? 99%. That's done. If we bring that down here, this was the placeholder image that PTGui created, and that has now updated from the edited version we had in Photoshop. And if we go back over here, you can see that that has updated the panorama with our new patched image, which I think looks pretty good. A couple of other things I'm going to fix up here. These cranes over here I really don't like, and I know that they're going to be a problem when we look at it in full 4K on the website. So let's go back into Tools, to the Detail Viewer, and if we use the View controls to look straight forward, just pan over this way, get those in the middle somewhere. If I zoom in a bit, you'll see what I mean. Those horrible red cranes right next to King's College there look horrible. So we'll patch this up in exactly the same way as we did the hole in the sky, using Photoshop. Create patch, and if we go back to Photoshop, we can see it's loaded up that image. You can see those cranes there, they look particularly horrible. Again, I'm just going to draw a selection around there. Generative fill, generate. Again, you could use the healing brush or the clone stamp tool to do this, but this is where I find generative fill is exceptional compared to doing it manually. I think that second one is option. There's no lines around there. Let's do the same with this. What's that over there? I think it's an aeroplane taking off, actually. I think that looks good. Let's do the same with these last two cranes over here. Now you can play with this to your heart's content, healing or fixing or patching any particular parts of your pano that you don't want, or they just look a bit nasty. Quite happy with that. I am going to get rid of that aeroplane, I think. I'm happy with that. All we need to do now is just save as we did before. Choose the defaults. That has saved. We can see this is updated in PTGui now. Those cranes have gone in the detail viewer, and they have also gone in the panorama editor. The other bits I want to get rid of are down here. This is me and my spotter in high vis, which I don't think we need there. It looks a bit weird. So back to the tools, go to the detail viewer, and I think this might be a little bit more difficult because those shots of me and my spotter are actually in the Nadir, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to pan across there in the same way. Let's have a look, see what we can do. Oh, that's not so bad. I'd like to get rid of that, whoever that is sitting on that park bench. That's me and my spotter. And I think these were some dignitaries that came in. This work was actually for Clare College. Do the same thing again. And those have loaded up into Photoshop. And again, I think I'm just going to use the generative fill to patch those out. And this is why it's really important to get at least 2 Nadir photographs. It really does make a big difference to the quality and the look of the finished panoramic. I think that looks okay. Let's save this. And any minute now these should disappear. Fantastic. And they will also have disappeared from the panorama itself. Now I'm happy with that. I may want to fiddle with it a little bit more, maybe get rid of some of these other people or whatever we need to do. We now need to generate the panorama. Now, because these are no longer in order, I've unticked that box. I'll realign the images again. And the Create Panorama button has been enabled. So we can... And now there's a really important thing that you have to do. We have to make sure that the width and the height of the finished panorama is going to be suitable and compatible with the piece of software that we're going to use to get this onto your website. This needs to be 23,000 by 11,500. It's again the 2:1 ratio, but it needs to be this size. That's it, all you need to do. And then you just hit Create Panorama. And off it goes. Now, although this might seem a little bit slow, you have to understand that the file sizes and the amount of work it's doing to stitch them together and finish the final panoramic JPEG that it's going to produce, it is significant. And PTGui is significantly faster than any of the other stitching solutions that I've used. And it's just running on a fairly simple MacBook Pro M1, nothing particularly fast or fancy, and you're not having to upload it to some cloud-based server. That's it, done. And then we can view it in the PTGui viewer. Bring this over here, it's a full 360 viewer. There we go. Look at that. Stunning. Stunning. We got a hole in the sky. We have got no hole in the sky. We've just got sky. And then down here, we've got Fellow's Garden. And I'm no longer there, standing with my spotter with a high vis on. Some people here punting, which looks very nice. And over here in King's, oops, going a bit fast, going over in King's, we can see there's no longer any nasty red cranes. Once you've stitched your 360 panorama and you've got your lovely high resolution equi-rectangular image, the next step is to publish it somewhere people can actually see it and spin around in a virtual 360 world. And this is where Marzipano comes in. It's a free open source tool that lets you turn your panoramic image into an interactive 360 viewer that you can embed on any website. No accounts, no upload limits, no watermarks. Just you, your image, and a bit of exported web magic. You don't need to write any code, but you do need to be comfortable with copying a few files into a folder and uploading them to your website. Just go to marzipano.net, and this is the homepage for the Marzipano open source project, a really fantastic piece of software that I'm really surprised isn't more popular, because it's free and it means you can take your panoramic image and host it on your own website. You don't have to pay anything, there's no upload limits or anything like that. If you want to, you can go and have a look at all the source code on GitHub. Here we go, fantastic. Or you can download the Marzipano tool onto your own machine and run it there. But by far the easiest way to do things is just click on Marzipano tool. And if you remember, I was very specific about the size of the panoramic that we produced out of PTGui. 23,000 by 11,500. This is the reason. It needs to be this size to work with Marzipano. So all we need to do, select files, pick the panorama that I generated out of PTGui, and now we can sit back and watch the beauty of Marzipano. And how this works is basically taking your stitched equirectangular 360 image and just breaking it into smaller tile chunks at multiple resolutions. That's why it's so performant within a browser on a website. And these tiles are then loaded dynamically as the viewer pans, zooms and rotates around the scene. And it's a bit like how Google Maps loads more detail as you zoom in. It runs entirely in the browser using WebGL for smooth performance, and it creates an interactive viewer that you can either host yourself with no dependencies, branding or upload limits. You just export the Pano, drop it into your site, and it's ready to explore. I'll show you the exact process of exporting in a minute, but to be honest, I just like to sit here and watch this. It really is quite spectacular. As you can see, we're about 2/3 of the way through. Sky's being filled in up here, just creating all these different tiles at multiple resolutions. It's fantastic. We're getting near the end. It's mesmerizing to watch. It's done. Fantastic. Now, there's a number of controls that you can put on here. We've got the drag facility enabled, so we can drag this around like this. It's currently set to auto rotate, but you can turn that off. When it goes on your website, you'll find a little auto rotate button up here with a play and a pause. I like to leave it on. View control buttons, I like to leave those on as well, and a full screen button. And you can even set the initial view. So I'm going to make that here like this. Set initial view. And if you want to, you can set hotspots, you can link it to other panoramics, do whatever you like. You can make a complete 360 tour with this. Now, to get this on your website, it really couldn't be simpler. You just hit the export button. There we go. And if you look in your downloads folder, you'll find there's a zip file, which if you unzip this, you'll find in here app files. And all you need to do is upload these to a folder on your website using FileZilla or something. And when you go to that web page, it'll fire up. And what I'll do is I'll leave a link to this on my website so you can see it working for yourself in a browser. So if you're comfortable with uploading files to your website, Marzipano is a brilliant solution. It's what I use for client work where I need full control over quality, layout and hosting. And it means you're not stuck with someone else's platform or battling with weird compression on social media. So there you have it. From planning and capturing your shots in the air to stitching them into a seamless, high-res panorama with PTGui to publishing interactive 360 on the web using Marzipano, that's the full workflow. It might sound like a lot, but once you've done it a couple of times, it becomes second nature and the results speak for themselves. A fully immersive 360-degree experience that anyone can explore on desktop or mobile in full resolution, hosted on your own site with no compression, no branding, and no third-party nonsense. Now, you can use this for your own portfolio as part of a commercial drone service or just to showcase property landmarks, venues, or events. It's a brilliant value add if you're already flying drones for clients. And let's be honest, most people still haven't seen a proper high-res 360 Pano. It's a lovely little wow moment that really sets your work apart. If you're building this into a service, you can brand the viewer, embed it into a custom web page, or create downloadable versions for clients that they can then host themselves. And if you're doing this for fun, well, it's a fantastic way to see the world from a new perspective and an excuse to fly a bit more, which is never a bad thing. All the links to everything I've talked about are in the description below. And if you found this useful, give it a like, leave a comment and let me know how you've been using it. And if you're new here, please subscribe. There's plenty more like this on the way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.